We ready to go now? Great. So good evening to everybody who's joined in from near and afar. The first ever Atmanirbhar Bharat webinar series, which gets off to a rather soft start right now at this point in time. Before we go any further, I'd like to introduce to you Ruhail Chaudhary, who is going to sort of introduce this entire thing to you before I sort of, take this entire program ahead. Ruhail Chaudhary, all yours.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is my pleasure to be a part of this program, and at the outset, I would like to thank my good friend Arup for this brilliant concept and idea of Atmanirbhar India series. I am sure during the evening, in course of the discussion, he would share some more details about this entire series that we are talking about, Atmanirbhar India series. So the discussions that are expected in the days to come, Arup would be telling more about that. So that is what he will share, something a bit more. But what is very important, I wanted to share a good news with all our readers and all the people, especially the students who are viewing our sites. This is a new site. The Voices Online is an international youth magazine which has started during the pandemic in the month of March and March and April. A couple of friends got together and we were discussing that how our children are not able to go to school, they are not able to go out and play. At the same time, they need some platform where they can share their ideas, they can interact with other children of their age, and that is exactly how this Voices was born. And since last 2 or 3 months, we have managed to do number of programs and online events. And today, the number of our readers are almost 20,000 across the world. So I think that is a big success. And for that, each one of you who are viewing the program or who have been our advisors, our patrons, our mentors, and our friends who have supported, a big thank you to everyone. Now, today's discussion is going to be very interesting and important. Important because I get a chance to interact with a lot of young people, college students, students who are in their professional courses, basically students who are about to start their professional careers in maybe next 1 or 2 years. And what I find while discussing with them, some of them to some extent are a bit perplexed, a bit confused, because when we see in social media or our conventional media, all the media channels, what we see, it's two kind of groups are extremely loud, and they are trying their best to set in their propaganda. One group is trying to say that the picture, they're trying to portray a very rosy and very positive picture. Perhaps it is over glorified picture about the economy, about the job prospects, which is also not correct, because that is adding to some kind of overconfidence, and maybe the students would actually not be prepared for the real challenges. And on the other hand, there is yet another group who are trying to downplay the government. Maybe we can call them the anti-government lobby, who are trying to show that our economy is finished, it's going to collapse, there will be no job opportunities, and that is also creating a lot of panic and unnecessary fear among students. So in that perspective, our discussion this evening is extremely important, where we have the industry experts and the most knowledgeable people from the educational industry, and we also have a young entrepreneur. We also have a moderator who's not just a great public speaker, but who has immense knowledge with him about the industry, about the market, about the economy. So it is very important for the students this evening to know the real picture, not from people who are not part of pro-government lobby or anti-government lobby, but who are genuine guides and mentor for our students, and who would show the path, who would tell them actually what kind of job prospects are there in the near future, and what kind of situation they can expect, what kind of alternatives, be it a startup or business opportunity, or how technology can be used to find more alternate careers. So it's going to be a very interesting and important discussion, and I'm very thankful to all our guests who have given time, and most importantly, Dr. Sengupta, who has agreed to be the chief guest and accepted our invitation. He is a big name not only in India but across the world in educational fraternity. Thank you, sir, Dr. Sengupta, for gracing this occasion as the chief guest for the evening. Thank you, Arup, for calling me for the keynote message. Now it is all yours. Let us start the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rohel. Before I go any further, Dr. Sengupta, it would be great if you could sort of kickstart this entire program and this series with a few thoughts of your own. Thank you.
Thank you all. At the outset, let me thank Mr. Rohel Chaudhary for doing a good job, a wonderful job. When Dr. Ghosh told me about you and your online venture at the beginning, I was quite excited, and I'm quite happy to be part of this August gathering. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, also. He's also here as one of the speakers. Thank you, Dr. Raja Chaudhary. I know him very well. He's also here because he was I was with the Speedan Institute director long back. So after Dr. Raja Chaudhary also spent a few years over there. So let me try to share my thoughts that we are indeed passing through a very, very difficult phase of the world per se, because there are three difficult trends, let me try to say. One, that there is a serious health pandemic, and the pandemic is a little bit lesser in intensity compared to the Spanish flu 1918, but could be more devastating in nature in terms of its economic impact. The second matter of concern is that we are facing a very serious disaster of the world economy after the Great Depression of 1929. And that's a matter of serious concern for all of us. And finally, there is also a very important trend that though we are talking about a very integrated world, we are talking about an existence of WTO and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter remains, for the last couple of years, there is a rise of ultranationalism in the different parts of the world. And that is possibly trying to disrupt to a certain extent the uniformity or the homogeneity of the world economy. So these are the three difficult trends. And Indian economy is no exception to these trends. We are passing through the very serious health pandemic, and very shortly, we might become even the largest country in terms of the coronavirus. Maybe people are predicting by the middle of October, or even before that, probably we will become in more number of coronavirus cases than the USA. Our economy is really in the doldrums because we had just now an announcement by the government of India in terms of the GDP shrinkage by more than 23%, and that's a matter of serious concern actually. So our economy is also in a difficult position, and in terms of the our ultranationalism and integration with the world economy, we are also facing those type of issues and those types of problems. So these are serious problems, and these are actually creating some issues in the economy, but there are certain very positive things also. Let me now try to talk about the little bit of positive things. That whenever there is a downfall in the economy, there is always a scope for revival. And there are various economic studies. Some studies say that you may have a U-shaped recovery, you may have a V-shaped recovery. But there was an interesting study by the Stanford University very recently, and let me try to quote it over here. The study says that if there is a steep fall, there will be steep rise. That essentially means if there is a V-shaped fall, there is likely to be a V-shaped growth in the economy. And that's a good news for all of us, because India has seen a steep fall in the economy. And let us all hope that the Indian economy will have a very high growth rate in the future. That's number one. The number two, that there is a very latest report of the McKinsey. Let me try to quote that for now. That is showing that if India can grow consistently for the next, let's say 7 to 8 years, let's say about 10 years or so, starting from 21 onwards, 2021 it's not possible anyway. I'm talking about 21, 22 onwards at the rate of 8 to 8.5%. there is a possibility that the India might become one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and we might go to the spot of third largest economy in the world, because we all targeted for the $5 trillion economy by 2022. It might not happen, but the study says that by 2025 we might become 5 trillion, and maybe by 2032 we might become even a 10 trillion economy. But the point is that today China has got a 14 trillion economy. We are talking about USA, which has got a roughly a 21 trillion economy. So the gap might grow, and therefore, as economists, we feel that India must grow at a rate of 10% or so in order to remain in the race for the top 3 economies of the world. But the fact of the matter remains that India is going to be continue to be one of the centers of the economic growth in the world to come. So that's one plus point, let me say. The second plus point is that the NEP 2020, the National Education Policy 2020, has definitely provided a landmark reforms as far as education goes. And if the recommendations are implemented, again, I'm using the word very clearly, that if the recommendations are implemented, because education happens to be the concurrent sector, and therefore the state some states particularly, I'm talking on, might put spokes in what the policy wants to implement. But if the implementation are implemented in toto, because we have been a part to the recommendation somewhere in the course of the implementation, somewhere in the course of the formulation of the NEP 2020, it will have a landmark change in the way the education system goes and the way the students are developed. Because today we are talking about a silo education, we are talking about a sectoral education, we are talking about a difference between knowledge and the skill, we are talking about arts, humanities, science, etc., etc. Probably all these silos will go away, and we will really see an university graduate coming out as a total holistic student, really becoming a global citizen with Indian values and ethos. So that's a second plus point, that over the next 5 to 10 years, as the education policy is implemented, we will see a landmark transformation in the education, because that's very important. I have always believed in that it is not the economy which leads an education, it is the education that leads an economy. If you see all the countries of the world which have grown, whether we are talking about it in terms of Germany, whether we are talking about it in terms of USA, we have seen there is a causal relationship, that education that leads to innovation, and the innovation leads to the growth of an economy. So why the education is important is that the transformation in Indian education system might lead transformation in which we think actually. We do the things, and that's what I'm talking about, our innovation, our patenting, our creativity, our articulation, etc., etc. And therefore India becoming a knowledge hub. And the moment India becomes a knowledge hub, we are not far from becoming an economic hub. So that's the second plus point I'm talking about NEP 2020. And third is people all talk about the tremendous amount of a demographic dividend which you have in India. India has got the most talented people in terms of the young manpower all over the country, and therefore we are sure that these talented manpower will become the global talent in the days to come. Because the government of India is seeing very clearly that we are trying to create at least 10 universities. That's what China did somewhere in the year of 1980, 1990. They called a scheme of 99. Similarly, the government of India is talking about a scheme of Nalanda, wherein we are trying to see that at least 10 universities can be created in the top 100 universities of the world. If that happens, probably India will transform into a different type of economy than what we are in. That will help in the enrichment of the demographic dividend and creating of a global talent pool for the Indian economy. So that's the 3 main plus points which we are seeing over a period of time. And one important point I just wanted to highlight before I close it for my initial remarks, that the people say there are job losses. Yes, there have been job losses, no doubt about it. The government of India data also shows we have lost approximately 2 crores jobs during the last period of lockdown for a period of 5 to 6 months. But at the college level, at the graduate level, and at the postgraduate level, let me put it that when I say graduate level, I'm talking about BA, BSc, BCom, etc., etc. Maybe in some of the university they talk about BBA, BMS, or somewhere talk about a media course, the BMM, the specialized courses I'm talking about, the graduate level, and also at the postgraduate level. So I'm talking about the MBA level and so on and so forth. Because I talk to a large number of the teachers, I talk to a large number of the students, I talk to every day almost. I talk to a large number of the placement officer and so on and so forth. I don't see a recession today. I don't see, let me put forth the word again, that I don't see a recession today. I see that the job market almost remains intact, but only point is probably the underemployment is increasing. What it means is actually probably the salaries are coming down. Some of the sectors, of course, are gone. For example, reality sector, that's totally gone. The hospitality sector is totally gone. But if you're looking at the major recruiter in terms of the consulting companies, if you're looking at the healthcare sector, if you're looking at the BFSI sector, if you're looking at the technological sector, if not only there is a increase, but there is an increase in the demand also. But the salary is an issue. So therefore, India has always faced a problem of underemployment rather than unemployment. Probably that will continue in the next couple of years. But as far the job market is concerned, I don't think there is much of an issue. And therefore, under this,
I think, Dr. Sengupta, I'm going to take that brilliantly, optimistic thought of yours for just a moment, at the cost of interrupting you for a moment. Just a moment on that. Now, I wish you to stay right here because I think there will be some very, very exciting things that we can discuss. Now, I have this analogy I want to share with you. I have the analogy of the koi fish, a very common fish that we eat, the koi fish, and I have the analogy of a lotus. In Japanese symbolism, I am a keen student, very low level keen student of Japanese philosophy, specifically Shinto religion. A koi fish going up a tree is a great symbol. For those of us who wish to look at it very positively, it is a symbol where the koi fish, which is typically supposed to be a fish going up a tree, is something which is very, very amazing, extraordinary. And at the same point in time, those of us who do not understand the fact that there could be something esoteric beyond life's normal methods, they would say that means that there's not enough water in the rivers that the koi fish goes up a tree. Shift laterally to the Chinese philosophies, and they have a very old legend which says that the koi fish swam the entire stretch of the Yellow River, the river of sorrow. And when it reached the end of the Yellow River, it does not specify which end it reached. The gods were so pleased that it had crossed over so much of trials and tribulations that it turned it into a golden dragon which signified prosperity, therefore the dragon year. Now, my question goes back to Dr. Sengupta for a very brief moment before I take it to all the other panelists. I'm sure they have a very, very eager thought to put in these things. Which part of the journey of the koi fish do you think India is going through today? Are we climbing up a tree or are we going down the river?
see, it all depends upon how do you look at it. As an optimist,
How do you look at it, sir?
I am looking at it that we are moving towards a better India.
So we are actually we've climbed the tree. Now we're actually going downstream, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Just a moment. You hold on while I get on to the other people. Dr. Ghosh, what is your idea about us? Do you concur with Dr. Sengupta's views or do you have a separate view yourself?
No, I am agreed with Dr. Sengupta. Yeah, it is for the better shaping of the India, and hope by our next 5 years we can cope up all the losses and it will be really a brilliant India, super India, terrific corporate India.
Oh, that's great. And Dr. Roy Chaudhary, what are your views on this one? The koi fish going up the tree and koi fish going down the river. Dr. Chaudhary, are you with us?
I think his internet problem, Arup.
Yeah.
He's here. Okay.
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yeah, absolutely. Loud and clear.
I think for the past 1 year, we are going through momentary interruptions. We may have a policy makeover. We need to take a fresh look as a government and collectively as a nation. But we are definitely going to move into the mainstream and we are moving into the water. I think I believe in being optimist. There is always course correction in the way we move ahead in life. And I think we are in the right direction.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Ghosh, Mr. Nilanjan Sengupta. Mr. Nilanjan Sengupta, what would be your views on this one? Did I get the name correct?
Yeah, it's Nilanjan Chakravarti.
My apologies. My apologies, sir.
No
But
problem.
then I will take refuge of the old Shakespearean saying what's in a name. Welcome,
That's
please.
true.
Please
Yeah,
go
but
ahead.
I completely agree with the rest of the panelists that we are absolutely moving in the right direction. And I would like to add to what Dr. Sengupta has mentioned, that the V, I think the demand is already there. It is not that we have lost demand. So recovery into the, the critical part of the V is just about, opening up things. And then we are back on the growth trajectory. So I do not even look at going from this, downhill point to the point where we were will be a matter of no time at all. And the real growth actually will start from there. And I think we are greatly poised for that, huge amount of growth.
So if you are the gods, you have actually changed the koi fish into a golden dragon.
Absolutely.
I have 4 gods in front of me who actually changed the koi fish into a golden dragon. I think to get this amount of unanimity in a particular panel discussion amongst people who have the kind of the brains, the experience, the exposure like you, I think it's phenomenal. Thank you. I'm going to get on to the next part of my of this entire webinar, and I'm going to start this one with the young lad with us, Shamriddho. What in your idea, Shamriddho, is omnipreneuring? Shamriddho, can you hear us?
Hello, am I audible now?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So thank you so much for inviting me out here with so many esteemed panelists out here. So omnipreneuring to me is basically thinking about everything like an entrepreneur, be it your basic survival instincts, to be it your managing your college, to managing your startup. Because what we need to understand is that everything that we do right now has got several implications for us in the future. Because right now, as Dr. Sengupta had appropriately pointed out, that we need to be global citizens with Indian values and ethos. That is of great importance, I believe, because tomorrow, the future is pretty uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. However, if we are going to prepare, just like the koi fish, as you said, if we are going to prepare to either climb the tree or move down the river, it is there when we succeed or when we perform to our best. So omnipreneuring to me is basically understanding how you're going to fit in such a way where you are resilient and you're sustainable as well.
Quick yes or no on this one. In the new normal,
Yeah.
does the concept of survival take prevalence over mere existence? Yes or no? In the new normal, does the concept of survival takes prevalence over mere existence?
Yes.
Okay, I'll pass that on to you to Dr. R.S. Ghosh. What would be your answer to that?
See, we know so far the approach of entrepreneur and entrepreneur.
No, sir, the new normal thing. I wanted yes or no from you before I ask you the other question.
Okay.
In the
Can
new
you repeat?
normal, does the concept of survival takes prevalence over mere existence? Do you think it's a yes or a no? What do you think about it?
Yes.
Yes. Dr. Roy Chaudhary.
Yeah.
Yes.
We need to survive.
Thank you. Mr. Sengupta.
I think this is not the right question to ask, because it's not a question of survival. We need to grow. We need to find the crisis and opportunity.
So pamper me for a moment. Just pamper me for one moment. If I ask this question to you, with due respect, what would be your answer? Would you say a yes or a no? Give me a moment.
Of course, you need to physically survive anyway. You need to survive anyway if you want to do something else. So there cannot be any no answer to this question. But what I'm trying to say is that this pandemic has given an opportunity to many of us. Many of us I'm talking about, not only me I'm talking about, maybe 100, like your Mr. Rahul Chaudhary has started this enterprise. So many of them are given a tremendous opportunity to grow, create something new. That's what I'm talking. So much beyond survival.
So this brings me to another popular Chinese term which is used across the world. It's called YG. I'm sure you're familiar with that. It says the Chinese believe that YG is a term which is used when opportunity flows out of a crisis. And it's something that the Chinese believe greatly and most deeply in. I'm going to go to my next question for the panel across. Do you believe that there is a difference between omnipreneuring and entrepreneuring in the current millennial generation? Anybody can take that question. Anybody. It's an open question. Anybody can take it.
Yeah, I can say basically the omnipreneuring is nothing but an extended version of the leadership model to entrepreneur and leadership version, leadership.
When you say extended version, what do you mean?
Which kind of leadership? May I get your question, please?
No, I'm saying when you say an extended version of leadership, what do you mean?
See, basically, this is the context of the scenario. Say, for an example, today we are in the severe COVID pandemic scenario. Okay, so entrepreneuring depends how the current situation globally. I'm talking about the globally because it is affected everywhere except 2-3 countries, minor base, but major, whether it is European, whether it is Asian, whether it is in American states. So here, in extended versions of leadership is entrepreneuring. There are some dimensional entrepreneurships. So any entrepreneur should be innovative in nature. The entrepreneur should take ability to take risk and opportunities with the most important, the legal ownership. So today, if you talk about the omnipreneur, so the entrepreneur should have much ahead about the vision. What could be there? What exactly Dr. Sengupta said that let us consider India. Our Honorable Prime Minister said, make in India. India could be the prime manufacturing hub, say for example, automobile, defense, foreign direct investment in trade, retail, pharmaceutical, healthcare, medical tourism, whatever it is. But the questions, whatever the education assembly here, first we must have that gyan, that is kind of the knowledge how the world should face this crisis, number one. Number two, we had traditional education system, the new National Education Policy 2020. There is many as roundtables through Higher Education Forum, Dr. Sengupta sir organized, and various it is organized about the new policy of the educations.
No, I think we're deviating here. I want to be very specific on this one. I want you to tell me, to enlighten us, what in your thoughts is the difference between an omnipreneur and an entrepreneur? As to why I'm asking this question to you, once I have your answer, I will share it with you.
Yeah, there is a difference because the entrepreneurship, it has certain limitations. An omnipreneur, considering the current situations, there should be then extended version of leadership in entrepreneur.
Got it. This is Dr. Roy Chaudhary. You were fidgeting. I'm sure you have to say something to this.
Yeah, when you talk about being an entrepreneur, you talk about having a choice. But when you talk about being an omnipreneur, you talk about an intention, a state of the mind, which encompasses integrity, passion, a growth mindset in all actions that you take, being collaborative, being inclusive in thought process to achieve success for all.
No,
and that's how I differentiate.
Okay, so if somebody has a bakery, and somebody has an idea how to give you clean water, which one would be omnipreneuring, the water or the bakery, and why?
Well, if somebody wants to give you water, in what context? To quench your thirst, or to propel your business, because water is an integral part of doing business. And if somebody is in bakery, are you a standard baker on the street who is selling every day, or you are offering your products to a lot of leading federated stores all over the country? So
what happens if this baker takes care of people who cannot afford to pay more than 10 rupees for a loaf of bread? Does that make him extraordinary?
Well, employing people and at the end of the day, offering a lot of stuff which remains to the poor people. Now that's part of his social responsibility. You may not as entrepreneur and you can still be socially responsible. I don't think it's proper to combine these two. I mean, we all have our, what do you call it, contribution to the society to make. That goes without saying, whether we are working in an organization or we are working for ourselves or we are working for the society. That's a different call altogether. But, you know, being an entrepreneur is a choice which we make. I mean, I made a choice of working in companies, working with a lot of people, working under the tutelage of a lot of people. You might made a choice in working for yourself, and in the process, working for a lot of people. You may exude an element of leadership through servitude. Now, that's a different call altogether. But omnipreneurship is the demand of the day today. We
You
need to
agree
be
to that?
both inclusive and forward-looking.
You agree to that?
Yes, I agree to that. Omnipreneurship is the demand of the day.
Great. I'm going to take this question across to somebody who has been a runner-up. I'm just got this note across. Along with two of his friends, he's been a runner-up at the Global HALT Business Summit in San Francisco 1 year ago. Shamrita Ghosh, tell us a little more about this Global HALT business thing where you were a runner-up, and what made you go to the Global HALT Business Summit? Did you go or were you selected?
Okay, so basically every year the HALT Business School offers something called the HALT Prize, which by Mr. Yusuf Khan was tagged as a Nobel Prize for teenage kids. So basically the HALT Prize is about a social entrepreneurship competition where people from all over the world come across with their ideas for their business plans in order to make the world a better place. So since we have been working on a water purification technology for the rural masses that's going to remove and all other contaminants are prevalent in this world. So we were selected basically to answer your question. So it happens through 3 rounds of selection. First, it happens in the regional, then comes the national, and then you go abroad. So going to San Francisco was itself an enriching process because more than going there, the process that we went through taught us a lot with regard to entrepreneurship, not only entrepreneurship, but also omnipreneuring, as you said, because in my opinion, omnipreneuring and entrepreneurship different with regard to the value it provides, because it made all the 3 of us a different person altogether. Whereas the value we are providing to the people right now today with regard to the quality of water or with regard to the products that we are providing to the people are today making a difference for the reason that entrepreneuring and entrepreneuring are today. Or the HALT Global Summit at San Francisco was itself a reason why everything propelled forward.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
As the youngest member of this particular panel, as a 20-year-old who's gone into entrepreneuring, what made you get into entrepreneuring or omnipreneuring, as you call it? I presume you're an architecture student at Jadavpur University. That's what your profile tells me. All right. So what made you get into, whatever?
So the entire idea of entrepreneurship is pretty much known to people, but a few know about the realities that are involved with it. So it all looks like a fancy bubble that people really play around with. So was I when I was in my first year, second year, when I was totally into the thing that I want to provide something to the people that's going to not only make out a business out of it, but provide some great value to the society. So gradually, when we started to look at the world in a totally different perspective, we found that water is one of the biggest problems that is plaguing the world today. Okay, you and I are today sitting in comfortable rooms with a glass of water in hand. However, there are millions out there who are plagued by not only normal contamination, but also contamination like arsenic and heavy metals. It's perfectly fine if you cannot relate to it. Even at first, we did not. So we made a few field trips to various villages in Bengal to understand this problem, to delve deeper into it. First of all, it started out as a college project for us. As we delve deeper, we understand it might be a college project for us. However, it's not a college project for the people who are plagued with the problem. If we could provide a solution to them, it is a life-changing moment for them.
Okay,
So
I'm going to stop you
that is
there.
when-
I'm going to stop you there is because you said a life-changing problem, right? I'm going to take
Yeah.
those three words and go to Mr. Sengupta. Sorry, Mr. Chakraborty. Nilanjan, you have been with IBM for over 30 years, or you have a 30-year experience in a lot of things. One of the things which struck me out was that you've been somebody who's been an experienced person in global delivery of project.
Yeah.
Which means basically you've given solutions to people with life-changing problems.
True. True.
What is your view? Or can you share a perspective of this?
Yeah, I think what I would like to mention is what lies at the base of everything is basically an innovative mindset. So entrepreneurship is not something that you see, when a person starts a new business, although commonly it tries to connote that sort of a thing. But entrepreneurship can also be when you're working for corporates, when you come up with a brilliant idea and you implement that idea in one of the solutions that you provide to the customer. So I think the base of everything is actually innovation, as Dr. Sengupta also mentioned in his brief address. So frankly, if I just try to summarize and what I would expect the society to come up with as the end towards an education system is that we should all propel basic research. We should go back to those days when actually a lot of emphasis was given on fundamentals and basic R&D. So once we have that innovative mindset, I think whether you are dealing with a small problem or a big problem, everything has a life-changing impact.
So to take this forward again with you, do you think that IoT is here to stay?
Absolutely, yes. And if you're looking at the hype cycle of Gartner, I think IoT has already it has gone down the trough and now it has come to a valley of where it is going to stabilize. IoT is going to pervade most of our daily lives. If you walk into a mall, you're very likely to see IoT over there. Because we all know how internet has changed the entire game. Just the sheer power of connectivity has brought forward so much. And now we talk about delivering education over internet. Now this is the time when things also need to get connected. And that is how we utilize the full value of connectivity. So IoT, yes, is definitely here to stay. And it is going to get intermingled with all the other technologies that we talk about. It is not a technology in isolation.
Do you see a lot of people thinking about or getting into startups about IoT?
Yes, a lot of it is probably right now a fad. But once again, if I go back to your earlier question about talking about life-changing problems, if you think of IoT as providing a solution to a elderly healthcare situation where the son is working probably somewhere in the US with parents staying back in Kolkata all on their own, and how IoT can come and help over there. I mean, you just think of a problem and probably you have a great technical solution. I'm not saying that IoT is always the solution, but then a mix of technologies and IoT can play a huge role in this. But just one point I want to make over here, because somewhere it is connected to Atmanirbhar Bharat also, is the point that are we also looking at what are the basics that are going to play a large role in this? What about the sensors? Who are manufacturing sensors? Should we just restrict our discussion on the top layer technology, or should our education system also take into account the brick and mortars? Is India ever going to manufacture sensors, or are we just going to talk about IoT on a superficial?
I have a point over there with you. Many years ago, maybe about 12 years ago, or maybe was it 10, whatever. My wife, who's a fellow entrepreneur like me, we on behalf of our foundation, we had taken a certain technology for solar power to be implemented in a particular northern state of India, and this was a state which had hardly 35% availability of power, which means about 65% of the state was non-electrified in those days. And the technology was being built by an Indian based out of France. And his only condition, I remember meeting him at an airport, he said, if you can get me a state or a couple of states or a bunch of states who are willing to put in the money, which is lesser than a thermal power plant, then I will come back and resettle in India. Long story cut short, he never resettled in India because nobody was willing to put that kind of money in. They would rather build cinemas and theaters and buildings because that made more money, and that made more money without a base. And that particular dream is still lost in India. You have New Power, you have Repower, you have Yashwant Sinha's son doing a lot of stuff in solar power stuff. But all of that we know for a fact is because we have some intensive studies as part of our foundation, and that is about some third generation or fourth generation technology. The technology that we are talking about involves titanium dioxide as a trap store release mechanism, which can be sold across villages like you sell an Airtel prepaid card.
Yeah.
So what we said was that we would have solar panels, which would be cheap, which don't take rocket science to manufacture, because China used to manufacture solar panels at about 1 rupee to a square foot now, once upon a time. All right. There's nothing in India which stopped that. But unfortunately, nobody is willing to take that chance. Nobody wants to say, I'm going to be the first. Like, for example, Shramritu out here, one of the key reasons we got him on the panel out here is that he and his bunch of, merry friends, they actually set up a startup in the middle of the COVID crisis. And not only that, they also have foreign direct investment in that startup in the middle of the COVID crisis.
Yeah.
Do you think IoT is going to go the way of solar power? That nobody wants to come up first? And if it does, would you have a solution for it?
A long-standing technology. So the solar story that you spoke about is a small part of the story. And today you see how renewables has taken over the whole of India. Today, albeit it was very slow movement for India, but today you see we are producing surplus power. So we are probably looking at places where distribution is a problem.
Yes, we're producing surplus power, Nilanjan, but at the end of the day, we don't have off-grid power credits, do we?
True.
If you have a power grid in your house, there is no Electricity Act. That act goes back to some 60 years before. It does not allow you to sell the surplus power to the state government.
True. But technology as an enabler is also there. So people are making bidirectional meters, which will enable you to do that. And I think it is just one step ahead. So policy is something that we do not influence directly, but it is also something that, if technology leads you to that, then policies are bound to be taken.
I'm going to take this question across to Dr. Sengupta. Dr. Sengupta, do you think that at the end of the day, if there is technology and employability, policy is bound to change accordingly? Has it changed?
Can you come again?
Dr. Sengupta, as I said, if you believe that there is the requisite technology, the requisite employability in that particular technological sector, policy is bound to change?
I don't know whether policy is bound to change or not, because it depends upon political interest. Because in a crony capitalism and in a capitalist setup what we are in, there could be resistance to change. But if you're talking about if there is a technology and there is an employability and therefore there is a future in India for increase of GDP and per capita income, policy should change. I don't know it will change or not. It should change. Rather it must change.
So you are going to, I don't see the confidence emanating from you saying that the policy will change as a matter of fact. Is that there is no systemic growth on this?
No, because that I am only talking from the past experience. Even after 70 years, we have got several policies we did not change. So there was a compelling reasons to do so.
Great. So
for many reasons. For example, labor reforms. Just the 3 labor reforms which the government of India has taken up. They should have been taken up much before, maybe long time back. But the type of the economic system what we had, the type of the socio-political system which we had, probably did not allow the government to take those type of steps. So that's a problem in India. There is so much of diversity, there is so much of division in the society, there is so much of inequality. So it's a very difficult to come up with the one congruent policy for the entire country. It doesn't work out.
So I have one question for you here. You will also agree with me that while it does not have the heritage or the lineage of a country like India going back to 5,000 plus odd years, the United States of America is also an embodiment of absolute diversity. Virtually there is nobody who's actually the original Americans can no longer be seen. But yet, given the fact that it has, a murder every half an hour or maybe 40 minutes, a rape every 30 minutes or 30 seconds, whatever it is, it has still managed to drive a certain sense of systemic discipline, process flows which are in absolute goal congruence into the entire system across education, across technology, across a lot of other things. How would you, with your kind of experience, want to differentiate that diversity achieving whatever it has achieved to this diversity which has not achieved whatever it has achieved?
See, if you want me to be blunt, then the problem in India is that we never say we're Indian. I always say I'm a Keralite, I'm a Bengali, I'm a Madrasi, whatever I'm talking about, I'm a Hindu or a Muslim, etc., etc. It's very difficult for me to say I'm an Indian. That's the biggest issue. In America, you go to any part of America, whatever may be their lineage, nobody says I'm a Chinese American. Nobody says I'm an Indian American. They say I'm American. When the further discussions take place, they may say I'm Indian American, I'm a Chinese American, I'm an African American, an SPN, and so on and so forth. But you ask any American per se, you discuss any issue with any American, he will say I'm an American. You will never come to know about the pedigree of an American. That's the difference, in my opinion.
So essentially what you're trying to say, or what you're actually telling us, is the fact that we seem to have a certain amount of lack of nationalism. Is that too strong a word am I putting in it?
Not nationalism. See, it's like this, that here, we always say that you should look the country first and you come last. But sometimes sense of belonging. So, but what has happened is over a period of time, I don't know what's the reason. See, root might be lying in our history also, that we probably look at ourselves and look at the country last. So we look at ourselves first and then country last.
Okay, let me take this
question. If you look at all the Indian victories, the battles have been lost. It has not been lost because of the outsiders. It has been lost because of the insiders. So it's a problem in India. So we say we have got 500. We say we have 539 princely states. I mean, still we are states. We have never become a part of India.
So exactly. So even if, despite having 29 states here and 50 states in that part of the world, when that part of the world can say I'm an American, both of us have a question. Why can't we simply say I'm an Indian? Why do we have to say I'm a Bengali first, or I'm a Keralian first, or a Muslim first, or whatever it is? That's one. Number two, I'm going to take this question across to Dr. Ghosh and Dr. Roy Choudhury. As people who run colleges, as people who are in daily touch with so many students, diverse students, how much time do you actually give across to people and tell them that, look, don't come to us with the fact that whether you're from Bengal or from Kerala or from Tamil Nadu or from Gujarat, just tell us you're an Indian. One. Two, how much importance do you attach to the non-academic performances of a particular student in seeing where that guy is going to go? Any one of you may take the question, please.
Yeah, I would like to take it.
Go ahead.
First and foremost, we have a historical perspective to be discussed. When you spoke about America and you gave the American example, the entire world moved towards America, not for success, but for survival first. The entire human migration which happened because of survival. The environment was conducive, people enjoyed the thrift, people succeeded, people made it happen. And then few people did come back to their roots, be it China, be it India, or any nook and corner of the world. The reverse migration has not happened to India. We have to accept the fact. And history says, all over the world, when people have come to India, they have come to loot, consolidate, and move out. Very few people have contributed. Now, I don't get into any historical discussion right now, but as you asked a question, in the capacity of an educationalist, I don't have regional bias. I don't need to ask that question, whether you're an Indian or a Bengali or a Keralite. I don't create that environment for engaging myself in a discussion. On the contrary, I see whether are people coming here to pay 10 lakhs or 15 lakhs and having a transaction and getting a job out of us, considering us as a jobs.com or a monster.com or a naukri.com? Are we a placement agency? Or we are ensuring that besides what they study in the textbooks, they're also going to enjoy experiential learning. That's where the real learning lies. And that is where most of us miss the bus. Unless and until we propagate this message across the society that yes, we are a hub where experiential learning is the demand of the day, we cannot move an inch forward. And this is what leading practitioners, I call them pracademics, people who are practitioners and in academics, they have been doing. They have envisaged this model and they're going for it. Maybe the number of cases are very small in number. That's a different issue. And even in India, but we have institutions who are doing this, and they're doing this for the last so many years. So I strongly believe that besides academic rigor, experiential learning is what will drive people forward.
The part about the non-academics and the academics of the student, if you please, if you can give us, shed a little bit of light on that.
Yeah. For example, understanding self, being mentored by peers, being mentored by specialists, being mentored by...
Do that in your college?
Yes, we do that. I'm just coming to that. Hear me out.
Program? All right.
Yeah. So self-management is one area. Mentoring is one area. Doing research, student consulting projects is one area. Corporate social responsibility and projects aligned to that is one area. Sustainable development goal-based projects is one area. Having various clubs, be it helping you to understand business or marketing or technology or operational or finance or just general well-being. Now that's a path students embark on when they try to become leaders of tomorrow. And very recently, as of yesterday evening, I launched the Center for Effective Leadership, which is going to be transformational and life-inspiring. So we do a lot. We run that extra mile to ensure that students thrive in experiential learning, besides peer academics.
Thank you, Dr. Roy Chaudhary. I think that's been fairly enlightening on this one.
Arup, can I say something?
Sure, please, please.
Just coming to this question, see, Dr. Raja has answered. What you say, basically, the personal level feeling or community level feeling happens still. There is some kind of institutions, not in Mumbai.
Although I do have an anonymous observation from somebody saying that.
Yeah, I'm going to answer. I'm going to answer.
It's not a question. I'm just an observation that all of us happen to be Bengalis out here. So
all are Bengalis, not from Calcutta. Let me answer these questions.
That is just an observation.
NRI. Arup is absolutely NRI. Mr. Nilanjan, he's stationed at Bangalore. And he is Mumbaikar. Sengupta sir is here in Mumbai and he is well-established national figure. I am half Mumbaikar, I am half Bengali. Ruhel is from Calcutta by professions. Dr. Raja Rai Chaudhary is Mumbai for almost 3 decades. So the questions it is don't take. It is not by default. It is somewhere coincidentally. All people came from a particular community but who have way of communication in English. So I have answered. Coming to your questions, Arup, that there are some concept. Some institutions are minority category institution and linguistic institution, minority linguistic. They have a reservation because they got their affiliation, the license on base category. So the trend was till 2000 or 2005-06, they used to keep say 50%, 55, 60% reservation for that category. But the trend has changed. The trend has changed now. Students are coming merit basis. I am talking my institute. Okay, I am representing my institute, ISMS Pune. Many of our students are there. If you see the first batch launched 2010, International Business, hardly 15% students basically from Bengal, not from Bengal, different outside of Bengal. And our current batch, just last week, I finished the inductions. I'm sharing with Dr. Rai Chaudhary, Mr. Nilanjan is our board of management members. Say currently the 70% students from out of Bengal. So it's not like that. So here the feelings to be there. I totally agree with Dr. Sengupta sir. If you just go through the historical data, whatever the battle fights, because we lost the battle. So we must have a feeling at first, we are Indian. Proud to be an Indian. Hardly 2 days, we just raise our color, our hands, and the flag hosting, one is on 15th August, one is on 26th January. The rest of the day, of course, this is also advantage, cultural diversity of our nations. If you just travel, I travel from Mumbai to Ladakh, my vehicle, I drive myself. You just cross 50 kilometers, you will get the taste of water different, the dialogue should be different. Suppose if you see the Navi Mumbai part of Raigad district, the fluent of Marathi's accent is totally different from Vidarbha. If you go to Konkan, on the border of Goa and Maharashtra, their accent of Marathi is different. Similarly, if you just travel between the border of UP and Bihar or the border of Bihar and Jharkhand, they cannot speak the Bhojpuri. But if you just go North Bihar, they will speak Bhojpuri little bit different and they will speak Maithili. This is just our cultural diversity. Here, the threat because of the political intervention, which the educate, the new generation, they should think it, yes, it is our right, the casting vote, but what sense? Are we here to build up the nations or are you here to fight among ourselves? This is my submission.
So I have a question for you here. How many times in a year do you tell your students that they are there or you educate them to build a nation? How many times do you particularly talk to them like that?
So we have the mentoring. So what Dr. Raichaudhuri said, they are not our competitor. They have a different category institutions. We have a different category institutions. We have a mentoring the first year. Whenever the students come induction, after the induction, the moment the session start, we have a mentoring. So mentoring, under each mentor, there are say 8 to 10 mentees. And this year we have started, today morning we started the corporate mentoring. I am a director, by birth I am a Bengali. The invitee speakers was a Sikh gentleman, Sardarji Mr. Harvinder Singh Sodhi. He is from Delhi. See, this is the difference, and he told that intercommunication in English, we always speak, there should be a team building, group study. Of course, there is a personality development, communication, and without, until unless you will develop a team within the circle, beyond the circle, that you will be thrown out by the society, thrown out by the corporate.
How much of a focus do you put or do you sort of generate in building entrepreneurs or omnipreneurs? I would leave the word omnipreneurs because it's pretty much new to the Indian scenario right now. But entrepreneurs, how much of focus do you put on startups, on a new idea? How much respect do you have for extraordinary ideas in your college?
See, when I was few years back, I joined Career Point University as a Dean Academics. So I took the initiative under the support of my Vice Chancellor and the Chancellor of that group. So it was a tri-party conjugal project, Career Point Startup Cell with the help of RICO, that is Rajasthan Industries Corporations, and one body, Startup Oasis, a group of alumni from IIM Bangalore. We have invested the incubator fund was given by the group chairman, Mr. Pramod Maheshwari. He shared the last Saturday dice, he got one institution and excellent award by the Voices Online. So initially he has given 50,000, just a token money, and later on 5 prototype project we have launched. 2 projects we have filed for patent, and of course I was the patent team leader. So 5 different herbal products was filed in patent. And currently this year, last year, prior to the COVID, 2018-19, the incubator volume has increased to 7.8 lakhs. So this is a self-satisfaction me, and these my current institutions.
When you say the incubator volume has increased by 7.8 lakhs, are they in numbers or are they in rupees?
No, this is a volume, means not in the numbers, this is a value. This is a volume of the money amount, 7.8 lakhs, okay?
What amount? I mean, what does this pertain to?
That is the total kind of investment taken till last year. It is 7.8 lakhs. So 50,000.
What is the kind of product it is thrown out into the market?
Say
How
basically,
marketable has it been?
basically this is a university. They had multiple disciplines. They have engineering and technology. Career Point is basically developing for the IITs. This IIT coaching centers. So their main emphasis on engineering technology. They have agriculture and applied sciences. Agriculture, they have nutraceuticals product, organic farming products, basic and applied sciences are prototype models are there. Life sciences, they have health sciences. They have health sciences, many pharmaceutical products. Actually, I did my post-graduation. So I have given the
I appreciate that. What I'm trying to figure out is a very simple thing. As an institution, how many startups have you thrown up into the system?
In my current institutions?
Yes.
Yeah, current institution, this year we formed the E-Cell, that is entrepreneurship cell.
I
We are
understand.
in the process to make tie-up with EDI. This is a leading institution
I know that.
located
I
in
know that.
Gandhinagar. So there are some criteria. We have also filed in Atal Innovative Mission, AIM.
Okay.
Students are working on various prototype models. So this is our launching phase this year in 2019-2020.
What's your target? How many of these startups do you want to launch out?
First year, our target, at least we should able to submit at least 10 to 12 different models of plans. First, the acquisition base. So first 2 years, there is no target students to get the value from the market. Let students get experience. The second year students, they will be the mentor. The AIM philosophy, the students are calling the mentor. Under the mentor, participant, under the participant, there are the mentors. So here we have taken the students, those who are not very keen to do their job through campus placement. See, our institute philosophy, we are the institutions, we always facilitate that placement, not in 100%, 200%, 300% bringing in numbers of company, but we are not taking the responsibility for offering the job. We are creating the environment, we are educating the students, and most important challenge by our group chairman is philosophy, that student, apart from knowledge, domain, skills, everything, enhancement skill, experiential learning, what Dr. Raja said, students should have developed the mind that is enterprise mentality.
And do you think they actually develop that kind of mind?
Yeah, they have developed and they are working to develop some prototype project. Because of the COVID pandemic, they are out of campus. I hope by October they will all arrive in the campus, and I can request Ruhel to launch a program. So you may come there at campus, or even the virtual, we can at least show some demo. Thank you, Arup.
You're welcome. Dr. Roy Chaudhary, what is your viewpoint on the same that Dr. Ghosh spoke about?
So this is a basic flaw in our management education, that we teach people to get jobs and not to become entrepreneurs. I think we need to move beyond giving people jobs or ensuring people jobs and making them entrepreneurs. Hardly out of 100 students, in a cohort of 100 students, you will have accidentally one guy who becomes an entrepreneur because of that intrinsic call, the call from within. But what is the institution doing consciously to develop new age entrepreneurs? The way I look at it, and especially when you mooted this idea of omnipreneurship as the discussion for the evening, you know, Arup, in the next 5 years, we need to have 30% of our students becoming entrepreneurs. Then we will have real growth. Otherwise, we are heading for serious troubled times. Where are the jobs? And as Dr. Sengupta had mentioned, I mean, unemployment is disguised in many ways. Okay, that's a big challenge. But today, the skill sets are very important. Where are the skill sets? Are we having skill sets which are relevant and contemporary?
Are we seeking those skill sets?
I mean, I would find it very difficult to give you an answer in the representing the management institutes at large. I would find it very difficult.
I appreciate the upfrontness.
Yeah. In bits and pieces, it's happening. Yeah.
So I'll give you a small example. I would take 2 minutes of all of your time to share a small example with you. I co-found, I chair a foundation for profit, not for profit, called the Ranmir Foundation. And one of the key reasons we launched the Ranmir Foundation was because I have a background of 20 years in working in villages across the country, specifically the north and the west, including Kashmir. And I had a friend of mine who runs a crowdfunding company. He said, look, we've never been into the handloom sector. We've crowdfunded almost everything, but we've never been to the handloom sector. We don't know, it's an unknown animal to us. I said, it's an animal, it's not a ghost. All right, an animal you can get around to knowing. It's not a ghost, okay? So a ghost does not have a pattern, an animal has a pattern. So we sat down together. He said, look, I can give you the money. The question is, you've got to front the money for me. You have to take care of the money, okay? So I said, this is what we're going to do. We will pay you the interest for the money, but a nominal interest. And we will put this money into the hands of people who need it desperately to create products at the base of the social pyramid. We took apart 13 communities across Rajasthan, across Bihar, across Jharkhand, UP, and Uttarakhand, and one small bunch of apple growers in Devsar, in a place called Anantnag in Kashmir. And I told them, I said, look, you and I, we know each other, which go back to some 15 to 20 odd years. You trust me, I trust you. You trust my foundation, I trust you, is because of whatever you do. I'm going to give this money to you without a document. You will do your work, you will create what you have created, and I have a brand. That brand will buy it back from you. You will get the money, you will return the money back to my foundation. I will return it back to the crowdfunder. Now, these are semi-literate people, but with extraordinary genealogical skills. Some can make a carpet with 250 knots per square inch. Some can make muslin. The art of muslin nobody knows nowadays, but we've reintroduced muslin from our brand in Calcutta Cross. Long story cut short, we gave back 63% of the capital in 3 years without a single scrap of paper being signed between the loanee and the loan giver. The crowdfunding company in question said, we are prepared to give you double the amount today, because in our kind of business, in the microloan business, if we get back 45% without chasing a guy, which means we've overdone our targets. We've got back 63% of you. They actually uploaded it into the internet. So we don't have a website for Ranveer. We have third-party opinion about us on the internet. And today, those same people in the pandemic have just not suffered. It's because we've taught them what to do. But when I wanted to go to a college, and I went to a couple of IIMs, I went to a couple of institutes to say that, look, can you give me people who can manage these projects for us like an entrepreneur? We will teach them what it takes. We will get them the money in the long run. They said, everybody's here for a job. They don't want to be entrepreneurs, but they're happy to criticize an entrepreneur. One of the key reasons I brought Shamrid onto the show, I was very interested when we got his profile, is because at the age of 20, he has managed to set a startup which has FDI into it. He does not even understand how FDI comes in. He said, I'm an architect. So when I was talking to him before that, he said, I'm an architect. I don't even know how FDI comes in. But when FDI came in, I had to run helter and skelter to figure things out. So when Ruhail mooted the idea of doing this, I said, omnipreneuring is going to be the new normal. I mean, we have water, we have housing, we have food. So for example, all the kids in college today, they snack. What do they snack on? They snack on pav bhaji, dosa, samosa, idli, this, that. None of them add any value to their entire system. I have a startup which came to our foundation about a couple of months ago saying that we will create bullet food packets. Small packets, 50 grams, 25 grams, 30 grams, 40 grams, 100 grams, or whatever it is, neatly packed with the correct amount of nutrition, right? And we will put it into the market and start from colleges. It's because most college kids don't know what to snack on during their breaks. They will go and eat some junk, and it all adds up in the long run. Now whoever brought this thing to me was in class 12. And with tremendous opposition from the family. They said, "Ye koi khane ka cheez tumko kya wo namkeen wala hona hai kya?" Just imagine. So I think, you would probably be the next change masters, if I might use that term. If you don't drive that change as people who run universities of getting an entrepreneur saying that I have to generate 15 entrepreneurs to address basic problems. I don't think we're going to go, all that, Dr. Ghosh, I've seen the Atal Incubation Mission from very, very near. All schools go to it is because they get a certain amount of money for that. In Calcutta, I know 2 schools who came to me saying that, okay, we have this. Would you come and join with us, and so that we can get 25 lakhs from the mission? I said, what are you going to do? What's your drawdown plan for 25 lakhs? What will you do with the 25 lakhs? They said, oh, forget that. We will pay you your fees. I said, we don't work for fees. So one of the lingering thoughts I want to leave, as we prepare to sort of, round off this particular very, very interesting webinar with so many of you having given up so much of your time, is that can we build from this evening onwards, can we build, even if in our minds, the microcosm of setting up an entrepreneuring setup where current entrepreneurs, people who've actually faced the grind, can come in and say, this is what you can do. We don't know how to make you successful, but we will definitely let you know how not to fail, because we've gone through that grind. Can we think about it? What's your thought on that, Dr. Roy Chaudhary?
Well, as you rightly mentioned, we should moot an idea of a barefoot movement in entrepreneurship in B schools. That is something very, very, very important, and that should be an integral part of the syllabi. And that has been the bane of the Indian education system. I'll give you a small example. When we take a faculty in, we try to base our judgment on what his academic qualifications are, because we have a UGC or an AICTE norm to follow. But what are the challenges he have gone through? What is his entrepreneurial capability? We don't check into all this. We have no record, no data. We have preconceived notions about looking at candidature. So if such people come into the institution, what do you expect? Entrepreneurship to be born? Not at all. We need guys from corporate world who have taken a sabbatical or who would like to start a second innings in giving back to the society in the form of educational or academic endeavor. These guys will be guys who would be much in demand tomorrow. That's why, when we talk about AACSB accreditation, you don't really look for scholarly aptitude people. You also look at people from professional aptitude standpoint. And that has been a great opportunity in America, which is sadly missing in a large portion of India. India is a huge country.
So just to take you on that point and to take it across to everybody else, one of the primetime questions my daughter faced when she was getting across to a US institution was that, have you ever built a startup? To which, coming from a family of startups, she said, yes, I have. And then they asked her a question which I've never heard any Indian institution ask. They said, have you failed? To which she said, yes, I have, because I'm redoing it all over again. I think 3 days later, she got admission. The same kid went across to 3 Indian institutions with academically great marks, marks that Indian institutions just love to see. Private institutions. One of them based near Pune. All right. And the first thing that she was told was that entrepreneuring is all good. How about your academics? Because this is an academic institution. Now, there's a bunch of millennials, and I know about 10 or 12 of these kids who went to college. Would you believe it that 9 of them went abroad? They said, we don't want to be here. If this is the way they look at us, we don't want to be here. So I think, just apart from setting up webinars like this, I think one of the key moments that I really want to explore with people like you, with people who've got such tremendous exposure, just tremendous expertise, experience over the years, is that perhaps, and Ruhail, I think would be a great idea to take this forward, to create a group or a web group or whatever technology can help us create, right? And share these thoughts again to figure out if we can be a part of a pioneering, bunch of people who've said, okay, while I can't change the system, but I can do a pilot. If the pilot fails, we will do it again. Does it work?
Before going further, there is one question pending in the question box. Somebody asked me, mention the question. I think some of us, or preferably Dr. Sengupta sir, can answer the questions.
All right, fine. There is no doubt about the fact that entrepreneurship is the need of the hour. Is that what you're trying to refer to as?
No. This is the questions. Yeah, there is no doubt. Yes, please.
Okay, Dr. Sengupta, I think you'll be the best person to answer that question.
What is that question?
The question is, there is no doubt about the fact that omnipreneurship is the need of the hour. So this is a question to all the educationists on this panel. How early in the education journey do you think does omnipreneurship be encouraged? And what changes does the education system need to promote omnipreneurship?
So I think this is already addressed in the, I think the idea is, while you can do also a program on national education policy, where I'd be happy to come back. You know, the National Education Policy 2020 has told very clearly that the entrepreneurship should be included from 6th standard onwards, class 6 onwards. That means what they're trying to say, that the entrepreneurship can only be created. You know, they're talking about lower cognitive skill, they're talking about a higher cognitive skill. That is the focus of the new education policy. And in the higher cognitive skill, they're talking about analytical ability, they're talking about the creative ability. And therefore, they're talking about that entrepreneurship should be built in the school curriculum itself from the 6th standard onwards.
I think
So
I'm
that's
all
the
in
answer to
favor
the
of that.
question. Yeah.
I'm all
So
in
what
favor
they're
of that.
talking about, what they're talking about, that if you really want to create an entrepreneur, higher education institutions can't do anything.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
You know, in America also, if you look at it, I will slightly differ with Dr. Rajaraj Chaudhary, because you know, if in America also look at it, 80% of the great teachers in America, they are purely academicians. They have nothing to do with industry. They never worked in the industry. They're straight from the college. They've done a PhD from MIT. They've done a PhD from the Harvard University. They've joined some other universities. It is the entrepreneurship ecosystem which is very important. An entrepreneurship ecosystem can be built up only from the childhood, not at the higher education level. And therefore, if you really want to create an entrepreneur, and that is the need of the hour, we must develop an entrepreneurship venture from the school itself. And I'll give a classic example over here. One of my close person called Arvind Narayanan. He used to work with the Developmental Bank of Singapore in in Bombay, in a very, very high position. He has taken a 3-year sabbatical and joined a new startup, which is only focused towards entrepreneurship development at the school level. And Arvind told me that day that it's a great experiment. They are almost seeing there is a huge amount of euphoria being created among the school children to become an entrepreneurs. I think those type of, I think this is a thought for Arup, that if you can start something to do in Calcutta or somewhere else, actually, the start entrepreneur
Dr. Sengupta, I already have one of those. It's called In the Mind.
Very good.
And we did our first program just before the COVID thing which hit. And it happened in Calcutta Boys School. And we selected 6 entrepreneuring ideas, brilliant ideas, from amongst a bunch of 110 people 10 young boys who applied. And one thing I will love to share with you, one particularly brilliant idea. So this guy, he did not have a piece of paper in his hand. He did not have a laptop or whatever it is. He just came up, he just brushed his hair like this, said, look, I've got an idea you may not like. So I said, look, we are here to like all ideas. He said, my idea is very simple. I want to create a platform where everybody comes in, pays 50 rupees and join. I said, so great, then what happens? He said, they give us 20% of their monthly salaries on the 2nd of the month that they earn it. And we will give them back the same salaries on the 25th of the month when they run out of money. So I said, what's your revenue model? He said, look, I don't know about the revenue model so well, but I do understand that 20% of his salary, which I have from so many people for 3 weeks, some financial wizard can turn that money around for some revenue model which can come back to my company. But I actually make sure that these people don't go bankrupt at the end of the month and spend on their credit cards. So I said, how did you get this idea? He said, because my dad goes bankrupt every 25th of the month. Now, if you take the humor out of this entire thing, it is so relevant. Another guy came up with drones for rural medicine. It's a very oft discussed subject. Zambia is one of the pioneers across the world and using drones for rural medicine, right? But look at this guy. They're all in class 9, 10, 11. So I am absolutely in sync with you, Dr. Sengupta, that we could set up a school-preneuring system. I call it a stupreneur, a student entrepreneur.
Now I go a step ahead. What I was trying to say, you can set up a school itself. You can think of setting up a school or a wing of a school, which only like EDI. He specializes in entrepreneurship at the higher level. You can think of setting up a school itself for entrepreneurship. That was my idea.
Why don't I take this idea
it one step forward?
Yeah, I think I'm going to take this idea up with you once we finish this. Maybe in a couple of months, weeks or whatever it is, we can chat and have a discussion on that. Is that okay with you?
Thank you.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
So before we sort of round up, because I think we're running out of time, I'm going to start this time off with Ruhail. Ruhail, is there anything which we have not been able to cover as far as the syllabus of this particular, I use the word syllabus, and this particular webinar goes? Anything else you'd like me to get across?
I think it was pretty exhaustive and extremely interesting and informative. So the students who are watching this, we are also getting a lot of comments. So only thing I would like to add up here is we must continue these kind of discussions, and we would really love to have our guest speakers more often. And Arup, we should plan more of these discussions very soon.
Yeah, I think for once, I think it's a very nice way to spend a Saturday evening, because I think I got to learn a lot. I have an entire pad full of notes, as you can see, from all of you, and I will make sure that I put it to good use. Mr. Sengupta, sorry, Mr. Chakraborty, I think that delivery system really worked with me is because we are a great exporting nation, but at the end of the day, we don't deliver on time. And that's a perennial problem with India across the world, that, these guys are great guys, but they don't deliver on time. With Dr. Roy Choudhury, I think I'm all in favor of setting up a system in colleges where people from the corporate sector, get into the colleges and say, look, academics is good. You have to know what you're learning all about, right? But at the end of the day, you have to solve some common pain issues or pain points of society. Dr. Ghosh, I think we and I, we could really think about a method by which we could work things out by, starting off a booster program in colleges like yours, which address, as I can perhaps correctly assume, a large number of middle-class boys and girls come to you for a postgraduate education.
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
you can do something on that particular variety.
Yes, basically we have one course started last year, that is MBA in Agri-Business Management. So the students are coming, they are from agriculture family, and might be they could be the second generation entrepreneur. Structurally said, with different thought processes in mind, we can definitely create some lucrative incubator, and I take the suggestions of Dr. Roy Choudhury and yours and Gupta sir's support that there should be a blending of academics and the corporate hunkos together. Academics cannot do, academics has a limitation, they have a structural way to follow. But the industry expert, if they come, they give, this is a basically joint and collaboration. Sure, we could be the host. If Ruhail comes, we can definitely organize some kind of innovative incubator from our institutions.
Perfect. I think Ruhail will take you up on that. And before we end, I think it's only fair to get across to the youngest guy in this entire lot, Shamriddha, for a sign-off statement. Shamriddha, what do you think about this entire thing? Did you think we made sense to your generation?
Yeah, hello. So
Hello.
honestly speaking, I think so. I learned a lot today, starting off with all the pointers that all the things spoke about. Opportunity leads to crisis. Innovation, where are the jobs, and creating solutions for the bottom of the pyramid. Because what I understand right now is there are a lot of problems that are prevalent, apart from the COVID crisis as well. And everything is in a gridlock manner. So until and unless we, create a performative gridlock surrounding those problems where we can free the people whom we are trying to serve from the existing solutions they have, that is when we try to create the real difference into the world. Because right now, the average consumer or the customer receives whatever they are given. They don't have much choice, be it water, be it energy, be it anything. And once that freedom of choice is given to them, that is when we become not only self-reliant, but also self-sufficient. In other words, that is when we become Atmanirbhar, I believe. So that was the greatest takeaway from this entire session.
Great. I think we will keep that in mind. And performative gridlock, did you say?
Yeah.
That's a new thing that I've learned. Thank you. I'm going to make note of that. Performative gridlock. That I think I'm going to remember that for a long, long time. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time.
One question is pending there. Can you see the chat box? Ms. Suparna Ghosh, I know the madam. She's my invitee.
All right.
Yeah.
So it says that a very insightful discussion in building entrepreneurs. How important do you think is teaching students resilience and training the minds? Okay, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think we teach resilience or training the minds in any institution in this country apart from the psychiatric institutions. So, nevertheless, I think I should open it up to the forum once more to answer. Anybody who wants to answer?
Yeah.
Let me take up this question first.
Yeah.
We teach. It's not that we don't teach. We teach in the MBA institutions. So we talk, we always used to talk about IQ, EQ, SQ, etc., etc. We have added a new question which is called adversity quotient nowadays. It has become very popular concept, academic concept, which is called AQ, and we talks about how to face an adversity and how to become resilient. So we teach it. In good institutions in the India country today, approximately let's say 1/4 of a credit of a course. That's what I'm talking about. The 7 to 8 hours. We talk on this. If you fail, how do you come out of it?
How much do students accept that? How keenly is that accepted?
That's a difficult
question. So do we have some metrics for that? I mean, teaching is one thing, but do we have the metrics and analytics to understand that?
Let me add one sentence which I wanted to add from a long time. In India, the problem is that we are only talking about knowledge, skill, and attitude. It is time that we shift to competency. All over the world, we talk about a competency-based teaching. So we developed a competency framework that these are the competencies which are needed at the end of this particular course. So we say a child has graduated in a law, these are the competencies. Some competencies are legal competencies, some competencies are generic competencies, some competencies are emotional competencies, and some competencies social competencies. But these are the competencies. So unless and until we develop those competencies for each education level, it's not possible to measure. It's a very, very difficult thing to measure. Therefore, what has happened in all over the world, there is a competency-based teaching only. Luckily, what has happened is in NEP 2020, they are moving towards a competency-based of teaching. In India, engineering colleges today have a competency-based teaching. There is a 12 competencies which are defined for the engineering colleges in India. For all other educational levels, it is going to come in another 2 to 3 years of time. Once that comes, this emotional intelligence, the adversity quotient which I talked about, that will be integrated with one of the competencies, and then the measurement will become easy.
So we still have to wait for some time for that to come.
Yes, of course.
Great. So I think we've more or less covered everything. Is there any question pending? No. I think Mrs. Suparna Ghosh, I'm sure you had your question answered to the satisfaction that you might want from that. So to all the panelists this evening, thank you very much for your time. It has been an absolute honor to have been able to moderate you. And I do hope I did not interrupt as often as I would have interrupted in the way of your thoughts or whatever it is. And I'm looking forward to seeing you maybe for a follow-up session, maybe in the months to come, to figure out how far did we go from this particular webinar. To all of you from my side, thank you very much. Good evening. Namaskar and Jai Hind. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Arup. Thank you, Ruhail.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thanks,
I extend my greetings to Sengupta sir for coming here, and Ruhail also. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohit. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Arup, you did a magnificent job.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr.
Moderating,
Sengupta.
you did a very, very